You were taught to be good, taught to be agreeable, to keep the peace, to make others comfortable. Somewhere along the way, you began to believe that being liked was the same as being safe, that pleasing others was the path to love. If you said yes enough times, people would respect you, appreciate you, and maybe even need you. But Carl Jung would have told you that this isn't kindness. This is a mask, and masks always come with a price. At first, the mask feels helpful. It smooths interactions, keeps people happy, and reduces friction. You become the reliable one, the peacemaker, the one who never makes things difficult. But over time, something subtle begins to shift. You notice a quiet ache that doesn't go away, a hollowness after every yes that you didn't mean, a resentment that creeps in, not just toward others, but toward yourself. You start to feel unseen. Even when surrounded by people, you feel like a ghost. You perform and they applaud, but it's not really you they're clapping for. It's the version of you you've learned to present, the helpful one, the agreeable one, the one who never says no. And the applause? It starts to feel like noise, not nourishment. People-pleasing doesn't make you kind. It makes you invisible. It's not a sign of love. It's often a symptom of fear. The fear of rejection, the fear of conflict, the fear that if you stopped being easy to love, you wouldn't be loved at all. Carl Jung understood this dynamic deeply. He called this outer shell, the agreeable face we show to the world. The persona. The persona is the mask we wear to survive society's expectations. It's not fake. In fact, it's essential. You can't go through life saying exactly what you think, acting out every impulse. Social life requires a bit of performance, a little restraint, a little diplomacy. But here's the danger Jung warned about. When you start believing the mask is your identity, you lose your soul. The persona isn't evil, but it's limited. It was built to serve a function, not to replace the core of who you are. And yet, for many, the mask becomes the only self they know. So what happens when you say yes for the 100th time, even though everything inside you wants to scream no? What happens when you keep smiling, even though your chest feels tight with resentment? What happens when you act calm, but inside you're boiling? What happens is simple. You disappear. Not all at once, not in a dramatic cinematic collapse, but slowly, quietly. You shrink. You soften your opinions, you delay your needs, you suppress your anger. And in doing so, you send the world a message. I don't matter as much. My voice is flexible. My time is negotiable. My boundaries are optional. And the world listens. Because people don't respond to your intentions. They respond to your patterns. If you teach them that you're always available, always agreeable, always fine with anything, they'll believe you. And they'll stop asking, stop checking in, stop wondering how you're really doing. But here's the catch. It's not their fault. You trained them. You trained them to expect your silence, to interpret your absence of conflict as comfort, to see your endless yes as enthusiasm, not compliance. And after a while, they stop believing you even have a no. This is why people-pleasing becomes a cage. Not because others are cruel, but because you never showed them the real you. And now you're trapped in a performance they've grown to depend on. Jung would say this isn't maturity. It's emotional survival. Most people-pleasers don't act this way because they're weak. They act this way because somewhere in their childhood, they learned that honesty was dangerous, that expressing needs led to punishment, that disagreement meant disconnection. So they adapted. They shrank. They performed. They became likable, polite, safe. But safety isn't the same as a whole. Being agreeable isn't the same as being alive. And eventually, the cost of being liked becomes too high. You begin to feel the symptoms long before you have the language for them. You overanalyze every reply. You replay conversations in your head, wondering if you upset someone. You say, "I'm sorry," out of habit, not necessity. You say yes, while your body says, "Please don't." You feel drained after socializing. You feel fake even when people compliment you. You start to wonder, Why do I feel invisible in relationships where I'm always giving so much? Because giving isn't the problem. Overgiving is. Jung believed that overgiving is often a sign of underbelonging. When we feel like we don't truly belong, we try to earn our place by becoming useful, helpful, easy, but the love that has to be earned through self-erasure never feels real. Because deep down, they're not loving the real you, they're loving the mask. And here's where things get even harder. When you finally begin to say no, when you start setting boundaries, and when you stop saying yes out of fear, people notice. And not always in a good way. They may say you've changed and that you're being cold, that you're not as nice as you used to be. But what they're really saying is, you're no longer easy to control. And that's the test, the moment where individuation begins. Jung didn't describe individuation as self-help. He described it as the process of reclaiming your whole self, the shadow, the instincts, the truths you've buried. It's not about becoming perfect. It's about becoming real, whole, integrated, awake. You're not here to fit into everyone else's story. You're here to write your own. But you can't do that if your first instinct is always to make others comfortable. You can't be free if your worth is tied to how well you perform your persona. You can't be known if you never let people see the parts of you that might disappoint them. And here's the hardest truth of all. Not everyone will like the real you. Some relationships will fade. Some people will fall away. But that's not loss. It's alignment. Because what you're shedding isn't love. It's dependency. Conditional approval, imitation connection. What remains is real. What remains are the people who respect your silence, not demand your words. Who hears your no and doesn't take it as a betrayal. They don't just tolerate your truth, they welcome it. And this, Jung would say, is where life actually begins. Of course, this awakening doesn't come without resistance, not just from others, but from within yourself. When you first stop pleasing, guilt shows up. It lives in your throat, in your silence, in the pit of your stomach. It whispers things like, you're being mean, you're letting people down, and you've changed. And that voice? It's not your truth, it's your conditioning. It's the echo of years spent equating self-sacrifice with love, politeness with worth, agreement with belonging. But Jung would urge you to pause, to listen, and to realize that's not guilt. It's withdrawal. You're detoxing from a life of performance, a life where being liked meant being safe, a life where you were rewarded for erasing yourself, subtly, quietly, completely. So, of course, stepping out of that identity feels terrifying. The guilt isn't proof that you're wrong. It's proof that you're finally waking up. Let it come. Let it burn. Don't fight it. Don't rush to fix it. Just breathe through it. Because every time you feel that guilt and act from truth anyway, you grow. Not louder, not harder, just more whole. This is what most modern advice misses. It tells you to set boundaries, to say no, to prioritize self-care. And while that's good advice, Jung went deeper. He didn't just see people pleasing as a behavior. He saw it as a fracture of the self, a split between the truth you feel and the identity you wear. He believed that when you repress the shadow, those instinctual, powerful, often uncomfortable parts of yourself, you don't become better. You become bitter. You become anxious, passive-aggressive, disconnected. Because deep down, you're not being honest. You're managing perceptions, not expressing your truth. And eventually, your body will tell the truth for you. You'll feel tired all the time. You'll overthink every reply. You'll feel anxious about disappointing people, even in small things. You'll give more than you have. You'll stay silent, not out of peace, but out of fear. And then you'll wonder why no one sees you, why no one truly knows you. Why do you feel so alone, even when surrounded? But this is the root of the problem. You've mistaken performance for connection. You've confused being needed with being loved. You've allowed your role to replace your identity. And you've lived in a way that constantly says, I'm here for you, but never once says, I'm here for me. And this isn't just sad, it's dangerous. When the world only sees the curated version of you, when they only know your mask, and when they only hear your yes and never your no, the love they give you will always feel hollow, not because they don't care, but because you never gave them access to your truth. You can't be loved if you're not known, and you can't be known if you never risk honesty. That's why the work of individuation is so hard, because it asks you to step away from the approval you've relied on your whole life. It asks you to lose comfort, to risk being misunderstood, and to disappoint people who are used to your compliance. It asks you to walk into loneliness, not as punishment, but as passage. And yes, at first, it's painful, terrifying, lonely. You feel like you're shedding a skin you've lived in for so long that you don't know who you are without it. You start to ask questions like, if I'm not the nice one, who am I? If I stop helping everyone, will they still love me? If I say no, will I be abandoned? These aren't surface-level fears. These are existential because your entire nervous system was trained to believe that your survival depended on being agreeable. But Jung would challenge that. He'd say, you were never born to please. You were born to live, to speak the truth, to feel deeply, to carry both light and shadow, to disappoint others in service of your integrity, to hold boundaries that protect your soul, not just your relationships. And here's the most liberating part. When you stop pleasing people, you don't become cruel. You become conscious. You don't push people away. You stop abandoning yourself. You don't become selfish. You become sovereign. And yes, not everyone will understand. Not everyone will stay. But the ones who do, they'll see you. Not the mask. Not the performance. You. And the peace that comes from that, it's quiet but powerful. Because now, when you say yes, it's real. Now, when you give, it's honest. Now, when you show up, it's not because you're afraid of being left. It's because you choose to be there. This is the kind of life Jung wanted for people. A life rooted not in performance, but in presence. Not in being liked, but in being whole. And it begins with one choice. The choice to stop pleasing and start listening to yourself. The choice to let the mask fall. The choice is to stop managing how people see you and start honoring what you actually feel. You might lose comfort, you might lose roles, but what you gain is far more important. You gain clarity, you gain alignment, you gain a life that feels like yours. You learn that it's not your job to keep everyone comfortable. It's your job to keep yourself honest. You learn that every no you speak isn't an act of defiance. It's an act of dignity. You learn that your needs aren't inconvenient, they're sacred. And with time, you stop over-explaining. You stop apologizing for existing. You stop shrinking to fit places you've outgrown. You become someone who can disappoint people without collapsing. Someone who can be misunderstood without abandoning your truth. Someone who doesn't just talk about boundaries but lives them. In quiet, consistent, embodied ways. And that's when the world starts to shift. Not because you demanded it, but because you trained it. With your stillness, with your clarity, with your refusal to disappear. Because the ones who belong in your life, the real ones, will never require your self-erasure. Still, this transformation isn't loud. It doesn't require you to announce it to the world. You don't need to declare that you're no longer a people pleaser. You don't need to tell everyone you've changed. You just begin. Quietly, intentionally, consistently. You stop rushing to reply right away. You pause before saying yes. You feel the urge to overgive, to soften your no, to apologize for setting limits. And you breathe instead of reacting. You don't explain every choice. You don't try to manage other people's reactions. You just start showing up differently. And something magical begins to happen. The world adjusts. People begin to recalibrate their expectations. The ones who relied on your endless flexibility stop pushing. The ones who manipulated your silence begin to fall away. The ones who truly see you, the rare ones, lean in. They respect your space. They match your honesty. They mirror your clarity. But this shift only holds if you embody the new standard. Not once. Not just when it's easy, but especially when it's hard. Especially when the guilt resurfaces. especially when someone you love looks at you like you've betrayed them, because for years they only knew the version of you that didn't have a spine. This is the moment when most people collapse, where they rush back to the comfort of their old role, the nice one, the helpful one, the one who smooths everything over, even when they're falling apart inside. But Jung would say, hold the line, let the discomfort pass through. Let people be disappointed. Let them think you've changed, because you have. You've stopped equating love with obedience. You've stopped confusing peace with silence. You've stopped abandoning yourself in the name of being good. And the more you do this, the more you feel something powerful returning. Your energy, your clarity, your sense of self. Not the self that was trained, the self that remembers. And this self? It doesn't shout, it doesn't demand, it doesn't need validation. It simply is, rooted, present, whole. This is what Jung meant by becoming individuated. It's not about rejecting society. It's about no longer being swallowed by it. It's about knowing where the mask ends and you begin. It's about holding space for the shadow, the softness, the fire, the fear, and integrating it all rather than exiling parts of yourself to fit someone else's mold. And ironically, this wholeness doesn't make you harder to be around. It makes you easier to trust. Because now people know that when you say yes, you mean it. That when you give, it's not from guilt. That when you speak, it's not a performance. It's truth. And that kind of presence is rare. It's magnetic. It's healing. Because most people are used to guessing, reading between the lines, navigating relationships where nothing is said directly, where everyone is smiling but no one feels seen, where everyone is performing but no one is safe. But when someone rooted in themselves walks into the room, everything changes. They don't seek approval. They bring clarity. They don't seek control. They offer respect. They don't avoid conflict. They face it with grace. This is the paradox of individuation. The more whole you become, the less you need others to change. You stop trying to fix people. You stop over-explaining yourself. You stop fearing that saying no makes you bad. You stop measuring your worth by how little space you take up. You no longer need to be liked to feel at peace, because your peace no longer lives in other people's reactions. It lives in your integrity. It lives in the quiet, knowing that you are no longer betraying yourself to be accepted. And for the first time, life begins to feel real. Not perfect, not always easy, but real, full, yours. You laugh and actually feel it. You rest and don't feel guilty. You speak up and don't spiral with anxiety after. You make choices that disappoint others, and you don't collapse. Because the goal was never to be invulnerable. It was to be authentic. Authenticity requires risk. Risking rejection. Risking judgment. Risking the loss of roles and relationships you once clung to for safety. However, Jung believed that only through this risk does the true self emerge. The self is clear, not cruel, grounded, not guarded, honest, not harsh. And here's the final piece. Once you've embodied this shift, your relationships will begin to change, not just in who stays or leaves, but in how you relate. Because when you no longer need to be liked, you show up with a deeper presence. You listen without performing. You speak without fear. You love without control. You set boundaries without guilt. And the connections that grow from that space are richer, truer, stronger. It is no longer built on performance, but on presence. No longer driven by fear, but by choice. It is no longer about being needed, but about being known. And you begin to realize something profound. The life you were always craving, the peace, the belonging, the freedom, was never out there. It was waiting for you to come home. Not to who you were told to be, but to who you actually are. And all it took was the courage to stop pleasing. But let's be honest, letting go of people-pleasing isn't just about behavior. It's about identity. It's about grieving the version of you that thought being agreeable was the safest way to survive. That version of you who smiled when they were hurt, who softened their voice so others wouldn't feel threatened, who gave endlessly because they believed love was something you had to earn. You don't just unlearn that overnight. It's not as simple as reading a quote, setting a boundary, or saying no one time. This is soul work, shadow work. The slow, painful, liberating process of peeling back everything you were trained to be just to find out who you actually are beneath it. And yes, you will mourn that version of you. You'll miss their ease, their automatic yes, their ability to stay quiet in hard moments. You'll even admire how selfless they were. How much did they give? But Jung would tell you that wasn't selflessness, that was self-erasure. It looked graceful on the outside, but inside, it was survival. A pattern shaped not by choice, but by fear. And what you're doing now, this breaking away, this confrontation with guilt and doubt and loneliness, it's not regression, it's reintegration. You're not becoming worse. You're becoming whole. And being whole means being honest, with others, but first with yourself. Honest about your exhaustion, honest about your bitterness, honest about the fact that despite being liked by many, you feel deeply unknown. Honest about the fact that all your niceness never led to peace, just silence. That all your giving never earned love, just expectation. All your accommodations never built safety, just patterns of quiet resentment and inner collapse. This honesty is uncomfortable, but it's sacred. It's the foundation of freedom. Because the truth doesn't control you. It grounds you. And once you taste that kind of truth, the world never quite looks the same again. You start noticing how many conversations are coded in performance. How many people speak not from the truth but from habit. You recognize the people who drain you, not because they're bad, but because your old self trained them to expect a version of you that no longer exists. And the grief comes again. Because when breaking the pattern, you lose not just comfort, but also familiarity. You lose the role you played so well, the mask that fits so neatly, the predictability of being liked, even if you were never truly known. But something else starts to grow in that space, something quieter than validation, but stronger than fear, self-possession. That's what Jung believed individuation led to, not self-improvement, not ego inflation, but the steady, grounded, unmistakable experience of being fully, unapologetically, and undeniably yourself. A self that doesn't need to shout, that doesn't need to convince, that doesn't collapse when someone is disappointed, that doesn't confuse being needed with being worthy. And that self? It becomes magnetic, not because it tries to attract, but because it no longer chases, it no longer begs, it no longer shrinks or stretches to fit spaces it doesn't belong in. It just is, fully, clearly, quietly. And this is where everything changes, not through noise, but through presence, not through power over others, but power within. You begin to notice how much you used to explain yourself, how often you softened your truth. How many times have you said yes while your body whispered no? You don't shame yourself for it. You understand it now. You see where it came from. You offer compassion to the version of you that didn't know better. But you also don't go back because you can't know what you now know. And what you know is this: your truth isn't too much. Your needs aren't a burden. Your boundaries aren't selfish. Your voice isn't dangerous. Your no isn't rejection. It's revelation. It reveals your shape, your preferences, your presence. And the people who truly see you won't just accept that shape. They'll honor it. That's what changes when you stop pleasing. Not just your behavior, but your field. You stop vibrating at the frequency of desperation, of overfunctioning, of quiet begging masked as politeness. And you start radiating something different, something sovereign, a calm certainty. A sense that you belong, not because you've earned it, but because you exist. And yes, it's subtle, but people feel it. They stop asking for more than you offer. They stop pushing when you pause. They stop expecting your flexibility as a given. Because your presence now communicates what your words once couldn't. I am no longer for sale. This is the awakening Jung pointed to. Not a rebellion, not a breakdown, but a return, a homecoming to the self, to the parts you exiled for the sake of harmony, to the truths you buried so you wouldn't lose connection. But now you understand. Any connection that requires your silence isn't a connection at all. And so you let go, gently but clearly, of roles, of expectations, of dynamics that only survived through your self-abandonment. And what remains? Peace. Not the fragile kind that depends on everyone being pleased, but the unshakable kind that lives in your gut, your spine, your stillness. Not everyone will like you, but the right ones will respect you. Not everyone will stay, but the ones who remain, they'll know you, not the mask, not the performer, not the agreeable ghost. You. And that, Jung would say, is the beginning of real life.